Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's Keep Up with Pryme. I'm Laura Andradas. I'm marketing lead at Pryme Global. And together with Aske Holst, product manager at Pryme Global, we will walk you through our latest updates. And we'll also take a deep dive into budgeting. And let's start with advanced projects, where we have introduced an alert option column in the project plan. And you can think of it as a traffic light. Apart from this, we have extended the number of lines displaying on the created sales documents list. Besides that, when importing projects, you can set up the auto creation of dimensions. And lastly, you won't need to reopen a timesheet, which contains rejected lines, when adding new ones. For those who work with subcontractors under the CIS in the UK, the CIS subcontractors statements can now be sent as an email. And last but not least, Pryme Time. Here there's a name change. So now Pryme Time is called Pryme Time on BGS. And enough talking from me. Let's see those new features in action. And over to you, Aske. Thanks a lot.
So the first feature we are going to look at is the new alert option on the task level. So if I open up a project plan here, we have a new option. It is not enabled by default. You will have to open up the personalized menu and find the field. It is called alert option and can be found here. And so you can drag this in, add it as a column, and now you can see the status with a color code, whether this is within budget or this is close to being budget, or it could also get red if it is over budget. And this is according to the task alert levels that you set in here as when you want to have the different colors. So I could set this at 50%, and then potentially that would change when I get another color. We now see that this gets yellow because we are closer to the limit than 50%. The next enhancement is that the created sales document list is now longer. So for the scenario where we have a project and we create invoice for it, so I will say create project invoices, and I will have a list of the documents created. In the past, there was a limit to showing a maximum of 10 documents. Now we are extending that to be a full screen list instead that can show all the possible documents. In this case, I only have 5, but you'll see that there is space for more. So we can show as many as can fit on the screen. And of course, you can always scroll. We introduced a new feature some time ago for importing projects. That has been a popular feature, especially for migration scenarios. We are extending on that feature to also auto-create dimensions for projects. So if you create projects using the import project screen, either manually importing them here, doing that with configuration packages, or by creating an import template in Excel, filling that out, reading that in again. Whenever you create projects, the settings for automatically creating dimension values based on each project are respected. The setting for that is found in the project setup, where you will see under create projects, we have the option to auto create dimension values for either global dimension 1 or global dimension 2. This part hasn't changed. The new part is that this is also done if doing an import of projects. Lastly, we have the option to add new timesheet lines when a timesheet has been rejected. This is the first step in a number of changes that will come to timesheets, making it easier to make changes to existing timesheets after they have been submitted for approval, but when there are changes to be made. So here for rejected timesheets, if I create a new timesheet, let's just create one for a simple project, and I'll select the task and put in a number of hours here, submit that, and then somebody else will go into timesheet approval, look at this. They will see that there are two entries. Maybe the first one, they say, let's reject this. At the time this is rejected, there would usually be an email to the timesheet submitter saying an entry has been rejected. And that means that they get that timesheet back in their list of open timesheets. I can open this up and we can see that there is 1 hour here that is rejected. And the problem before was that I could change the description, I could change the quantity. But what happens if I want to, say, split this line and say, well, half of it is for one thing, half of it is for another. So maybe I want to create an additional line for something that is something else, another ticket number, another reference, another piece of work, and say this was half an hour and this was actually half an hour and now this is okay. This I can do now. That was not possible before. So for some selected scenarios, it's now possible to create additional entries on a timesheet. It is not possible in every single scenario. There are still scenarios where you must reopen the timesheet and make the changes after that. But for selected scenarios like this, it is now possible. In the future, there will be a feature to allow reopening of timesheets without doing a full reversal. That should also make it a lot easier. That covers the new features for an enhancement for advanced projects. Next up, we have in the CAS and RCT app, there is a function to send out subcontractor statements, and that is not new. We have had that for a long time. In the past, you had to use this to create PDFs, and then you would manually create emails or print them, or however you would like to send them to each of your subcontractors. We now added a send email action. And if you select this and run it, it will send out emails to each subcontractor using the email address defined on that subcontractor. So it should make it a lot smoother if you have a lot of subcontractors that are subject to the CAS scheme. So question on the emailing for subcontractor CAS. Does this use the standard Business Central email profiling? Yes, it does. So it will use the profiles. And so if we look at, and I will quickly share again. Yeah, it will use the standard email accounts, yes, for the different scenarios. We're looking at scenarios here. So there are email scenarios for this. So I was just looking for the word email scenario. So email scenarios, and we have, in this case, I have one account and I can select different scenarios. And one of the email scenarios is CAS statement. So I can set up a special account and assign the email scenario of CAS statements to that one. And if not, it will go on to the default account for any scenario that is not assigned to anything. So yes, you can use a specific account for that. Lastly, there is a more architectural change, and that is Pryme time, which we are renaming to Pryme time on PGS. So if we look in extension management, we will see that the app Pryme time has now changed its name to become Pryme time on PGS. For most, this should not make any practical difference. It is just a name change. There can be scenarios where customizations are made and they are referencing Pryme time. In that case, it is important that those customizations are adjusted to reference Pryme time on PGS. So there's a few extra letters to add to that reference in that customization. But functionally, there's no difference. It's only a name change. Also be aware that For installing and updating, there is Pryme Time on PGS, which is the old Pryme Time, but there is also a new Pryme Time. We haven't launched that yet, but it will be launched in the future. So if you search for Pryme Time, you will find that there is both a Pryme Time and a Pryme Time on PGS. Pryme Time is a new product. Pryme Time on PGS is the existing Pryme Time project that is renamed. So maybe a bit confusing, but we have a good reason for doing it. And it is that Pryme Time on PGS is only for use with progressors. And we want to be very clear on that. And we want to have the opportunity to use the Pryme Time name for other purposes. So be aware, two different apps, and they should not be installed together at this point in time. That covers changes we had for today. Then we will go into a deep dive on budgeting and some of the features we have in the budgeting area. Let's open up a project. I have a small demo project in here where I have not added much data. It is just a shell project, and we should do some budgeting. In the budgeting area, we have a lot of different features that can be used in different ways. Most will start with a budget matrix. The budget matrix allows you to budget for different kinds of resources, items, expenses on different tasks at different points in time. So basically, we have 3 dimensions to work with: who does the work, when it is going to be done, and what is the work to be done. So I can go in here and say I would like to budget for a resource group, select that resource group, in my case, consultants. I have my list of tasks down here, and I have a timeline. The timeline can be day, week, month, etc., and that can be changed here to the desired level of detail. And then I can put in a number of hours here and in different columns, and that all adds up. The quantities are, of course, also converted into a monetary value, so I can at any point switch over and look at what is the cost of this according to my cost setup, what is the price, what is the profit. And I also get that as a total calculated together. But I can only make changes using the quantity setup. I can also budget for expenses by amount, and I can budget for items. If I budget for items, that is, of course, slightly different in that, especially for items, you can use different units of measure. Technically, you can do that for resources as well, but usually we count resources in hours. If I want to use a different unit of measure, I need to show the extra filters. And then I get a filter down here for unit of measure. And so I could say, I want to budget for this, but I want to budget in full pallets instead. So if I go down here, again, I could say I need to budget for 5 of these. So I put in the number 5, and this is important. I put it in the unit of measure I want to use, in this case, pallets. So I put in the number 5. When I leave the field, it will recalculate that into the base unit of measure. So even though I entered 5, we see 40 because there are 8 pieces on a pallet, and we wanted 5 pallets, so we get 40 pieces. So this might be a bit confusing at first, that you enter one number and see a different number, but that's because you could use different units of measure, and we can only add up the totals if we are counting that in the base unit of measure. On the budget entry that we create, we will track both the unit of measure used and the base unit of measure. So we can see here that we are counting this as 5 pallets. This is the information that we will use going forward. The budget matrix is one way to create budgets. We also have some other options. There is a budget matrix with capacity. That is especially interesting for resource budgeting, where we can see that not only do we get the budget lines, but we also get the capacity shown down here. For the capacity, by default, it will always show the full capacity. In most cases, you would like to see the remaining capacity. And for that, you use the capacity show and change that to remaining. And we can now see that we have less remaining than the full quantity. And so if we are going to budget, we should not budget more in this period than 84 hours in total for the group of consultants. Also be aware that the totals here seem to not add up. We have 40 hours for Cassie, 40 hours for Claire, and 19 hours for Connie available, which is, of course, 99 hours, but it shows 84 hours as available capacity. And that's because we just created budget entries on the level of consultants for hours that we have not specified the specific name of. So you should, in this case, never budget for more than 90 hours on Connie, or 40 for Claire, or 40 for Cassie, but you should also not go above 84 for the group as a whole if you're budgeting on the group level. And as we add additional lines, we will see that those numbers go down. So if I add budget lines for Cassie in here, we should see that I'll put in 15 hours here. We should see that down here, there is now 25 hours available for Cassie. So working with capacities in budgets is an alternative to doing resource planning. It is a different way of looking at it. And for some businesses, using capacities might be a simpler option than using resource planning, which is more detailed, provides more flexibility and features, but can also require more admin. In the budget matrix family, we also have budget matrix with calendar. That is rarely used. It will pull in the Outlook calendar of the resources and show available time compared to what people have planned in their calendars. We don't see much use for that except in special scenarios. But the budget matrix by resource can be really useful. The budget matrix by resource twists the matrix into, instead of showing tasks, it shows a list of resources as the lines. The columns are still the date, but in the header we select the task. So mentioning we have 3 dimensions to play with: who is going to do the work, what work is to be done, and when are we going to do it. We're moving one of the dimensions out of the matrix and up into the header. So in here, I could instead go for determining specifications, and we can see that we now have the 15 hours on Cassie that we put in the other matrix. So we're just displaying it in a different way. So for some scenarios, this is easier to see who is doing what on a specific task. With a budget in place, we can, of course, make changes to it. And there are multiple ways of doing that. One of those is a budget journal. The first time we open a budget journal, we will need to define a new budget journal template and a journal batch. I'll create one quickly in here. I'll simply create one called budget. And I'll also create a batch, and I'll create a batch for me. So I will call this HSO because these are my initials. And then we can go in and edit the journal. The budget journal allows you to make changes to budgets in a more journal-like experience. I can either make manual entries in here to put into the budget. I could also change an existing budget this way and say, I would like to pull in the entries from my demo projects, and then I get a number of lines in here. And for some scenarios, it's easier to work with the lines than the matrix. You can change the descriptions. You can, of course, add new lines. And one of the things you can do in here that you cannot do in the matrix is that you can change the cost and the price directly. Using the matrix, you can only change the quantities, well, except for expenses, which you can enter as amounts. So this provides some advantages. You could also take the lines from here, copy them, put them into an Excel sheet, make your changes, paste those lines back again if you're more familiar with working in Excel. Or you could use the edit in Excel feature. So there are multiple ways, and the project journal gives some flexibility in that area. Looking at budget entries, we can also copy budget entries from another project. When we do that, we select copy budgets. You could also actually copy the usage of another project and make that budget in the new one. That is useful if you're rolling over projects year by year. We had a project for 2024. We want to have a project for doing work in 2025, and we expect to do about the same amount of work in 2025 as we did in 2024 on another project. So you can copy entries. This does not make any change to the original project that you're copying from. It is a straight copy. Interestingly, you can force the creation of task codes. So if there are budget entries on the existing project that does not exist in the new one, it will create those tasks on the new project if you select this one. Otherwise, it will simply skip them. And you can also decide if you want to keep the prices from the original project or you want the prices to be recalculated. If you have situations where budgets are created on the wrong project, you can use the transfer budget entries function. That will move budget entries from one project to another. So here it's not a copy, it's a move instead. It's called transfer budget entries. There is a possibility to split resource group budgets. This is again in the area of not using resource planning. But if you have budgets that are on the level of resource groups, like I have here, I have entries for consultants, 20 hours, you can decide to split them. So I can take these hours, the 20 hours that I have here, these are two entries, and I can go in and say split budget lines. And then I can say, well, out of this, I want some of these entries to go, some of these hours to go to Cassie. She should do this work next week. This is for determining specification. And I want to take 7 of those hours and have her do that. And so I'm splitting out 7 hours out of the 20. And then I need to press the update budget to actually do this. And when I do it, it will ask me, do I want to remove the hours that I have not split out or just want to keep them? The default option is to keep the existing hours unsplit on the resource group. But if you're moving almost everything out and you just have a few hours, they say, well, they're going away, then you can blank them out. And so we will see that we now have 13 hours to split, and we can do that at a later point. Of course, the totals doesn't change, but we've specified in more detail who will do the work. An alternative for that, for simpler scenarios, is the option to swap resource. The swap resource will allow you to take time that is specified to a resource group or a named resource and simply put it on another resource. So I could say all the time on consultants should go to Claire. That is one option. And so it will simply move it from the resource group into a named resource. But it is not as detailed as a split where you can do splits multiple ways. There are also options to move existing budget entries to a new date. So I could move my budget ahead, let's say 1 month, or it could be moved ahead 5 weeks. I could also move all my budget entries to a specific date. So I can group them together. If they are spread out over a period of time, I can say I want everything to be moved to the 1st of June, for instance. And when I do this, I will get a report of what actual changes were made, where I can see what the new dates are on the entries. If I made price changes to my price list, that will not immediately affect my budget. The prices on the budget entries are static. As budget entries are created, they will take the price list that exists at that point in time. But if you're doing price changes, you might want to do a recalculation of your budget. Then it will go out for every single budget entry. It will look at what are the current rates and it will apply those. And you can also say, do you want to update the chargeability of that? Usually you don't want to do that, but in some cases you might want to do that. Then we have the budget repeating function. The budget repeating function is similar to the function in Outlook where you can have budget entries that are recurring, similar to a meeting that is recurring weekly, monthly, etc. And you simply set a period of time where you say, well, from the 1st of March until sometime in June, I want something to repeat. There can be maybe be a maximum of repetitions. So you can play with these settings. There's a lot of options. You define what task you want the entries to go to, what resource or resource group, etc. And then, of course, the number of hours or the quantity per entry, so 3 hours. And then you decide the recurrency. Is that a daily recurrence for every 2 days for certain weekdays? Is it a weekly recurrence, etc.? So I could say every week on Tuesday, I want these 3 hours to be added. And then I have to create those entries. Important here. Don't forget to press the create budget entry, create budgets button. If you just close, nothing happens. You have to select this create budget button and it will create additional entries for you. Lastly, we have something that is for ongoing projects. It is a rolling budget feature. And the rolling budget feature allows you to take entries from an existing budget and put them into a new budget version. So I can say I want to put everything into a estimate at completion budget version. Maybe I want to make this the active budget version. That is an option. And you almost always want to copy the usage to budget. And you do that until a certain date. So if I had usage on this project in the past, let's say we worked on this in February, I can set a cutoff date on the last of February, meaning all the time that I've spent up until the last of February will be treated as budget entries. And everything I have as budget entries from the 1st of March going forward will become budget entries. So I'm truing up the budget, saying everything we did in the past, that is now the budget for the past, meaning we make it the same. And usually I would copy all the different kinds of usage. And that creates a new budget version for me. And we can see this is now the actual budget version. So these are some of the features in budgets. There is more to look at, but this is what we have time for today.